The first time she called him dad, the room didn't go silent. I did. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind that slips through memory if nothing unusual happens. The ceiling fan hummed lazily above us, pushing around the smell of garlic and butter from the pan I'd just taken off the stove. I remember thinking the rice might be slightly overcooked. I remember the clock on the wall ticking too loud for such a calm night. And then her voice cut through it. "Dad, can I have more juice?" She said it without hesitation, no fear, no mistake, as if it were the most natural word in the world. My husband didn't flinch. He didn't correct her. He simply reached for the carton, poured the juice, and slid the glass across the table with a tired smile. My hands stayed frozen around the dish towel. My heart, however, began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a moment, I told myself I had imagined it. Children say strange things. They mix words. They copy what they hear at school or on television. That's what I told myself as I forced a smile and sat down across from them. But something had shifted. I felt it in the air, heavy and unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks. That night, I lay awake long after my husband fell asleep. His breathing was steady beside me, familiar, almost comforting, yet suddenly foreign. The ceiling fan clicked softly above us, and I counted each rotation like it might ground me in reality. Dad. The word replayed in my mind over and over until it lost all meaning and gained 1,000 questions instead. Before all of this, my life was simple. Not perfect, just steady. I had been married to Mark for 12 years. He wasn't a bad man, at least not in the ways people usually mean. He didn't yell. He didn't drink. He worked long hours as a warehouse supervisor, often coming home after midnight smelling faintly of dust and coffee. I used to feel proud of his work ethic, used to tell myself his exhaustion was proof of his devotion to providing for us. We never had children of our own. Doctors had given us words like unlikely and complicated. I carried those words quietly, folding them into myself like old letters I couldn't throw away. Mark rarely spoke about it. When he did, he'd pat my knee and say, "It's okay, we're enough." Then his sister died. At least, that's how the story was told. A sudden illness, no parents in the picture, a little girl left behind barely 3 years old, with big, dark eyes and hair that tangled if you looked at it wrong. Mark came home that night shaken, his voice tight as he explained everything. "She's my responsibility now, just until we figure things out." I didn't hesitate. I never did. I opened my arms, my home, my heart wide and willing. Her name was Lily. She came to us with a small pink suitcase and a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. She cried the first night until her voice turned hoarse, calling for someone who wasn't there. I sat on the edge of her bed and rocked her until she fell asleep against my shoulder, damp tears soaking into my sweater. From that moment on, I was her world. I learned how she liked her toast, barely browned, cut into triangles. I learned the song that calmed her during thunderstorms. I learned how to braid her hair, clumsy at first, then confident. I packed her lunches, I kissed scraped knees, I attended parent-teacher meetings alone, because Mark was always working late. People assumed she was mine, and I let them. It felt good in a way I never admitted out loud. When she called me auntie at first, then slowly shifted to my name, and finally, just once, shy and unsure, Mom, my chest ached with a joy so sharp it scared me. Mark corrected her then. "She's auntie," he said gently. "Remember?" I remember feeling a small sting, quick and easily dismissed. He always kept a careful distance in those early years. Loving, yes, but reserved. He didn't help with baths, didn't attend school events, said he didn't know how to handle that stuff. I never pushed. I thought he was grieving in his own way. As Lily grew, Mark grew closer. He started coming home earlier on some nights. He helped with homework. He sat beside her on the couch, their heads bent together over cartoons or coloring books. I told myself this was healing, that this was what family looked like finding its balance. But there were things I didn't notice then, or perhaps things I noticed and chose to ignore. The way Lily's eyes followed Mark when he left the room. The way she mirrored his expressions without realizing it. The way his hand lingered just a moment too long on her shoulder. Love can be blinding, especially when it finally gives you something you thought you'd never have. That Tuesday night, the juice, the word, the silence was only the beginning. Because once a truth starts to surface, it doesn't stop gently. It pushes, it demands, and it takes everything with it. The morning after Lily called him Dad, I woke up before the alarm. The house was quiet in that fragile way it only is just before dawn. The kind of quiet where you can hear the refrigerator hum and the pipes click softly behind the walls. I lay there, staring at the pale gray ceiling, my mind replaying the night before like a scratched record. Mark slept on his back, one arm flung out, his mouth slightly open. He looked peaceful, innocent even. I studied his face the way you do when you're trying to convince yourself that you know someone completely. I told myself not to ruin a good thing with unnecessary suspicion. By the time Lily padded into the kitchen, her socks mismatched and her hair sticking up in the back, I had already packed her lunch and brewed coffee. Muscle memory carried me through the morning. I spread peanut butter, cut apples, zipped backpacks. "Good morning, sunshine," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. She smiled at me, bright and uncomplicated. "Morning." No mom, no dad, just morning. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Mark kissed my cheek on his way out the door. "Late night again," he said, reaching for his keys. I nodded. "Drive safe." The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. That was our rhythm. Mark worked, I held the house together, Lily grew right in front of me, inch by inch, year by year. I volunteered at her school. I knew her friends' names, their parents, their allergies. I stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays and ironing uniforms for picture day. On weekends, I took her to the park, where she'd run back to me breathless and laughing, collapsing into my arms like it was the safest place in the world. And for her, it was. Mark's role became selective. He was present in bursts, grand gestures instead of daily labor. He'd bring home gifts unexpectedly, take her out for ice cream at odd hours, let her stay up later than I liked. "Don't spoil her," I'd say lightly. He'd grin. She deserves it. Sometimes I caught him watching us, me and Lily, his expression unreadable. Not jealous, not resentful, just distant, as if he were standing outside a window looking in. I thought it was guilt for working so much. Looking back, I wonder how many excuses love can invent before it runs out. The first real crack didn't come as a revelation. It came as a question. Lily was 9 when it happened, old enough to be curious, old enough to notice patterns. We were folding laundry together on the living room floor, the television murmuring in the background. She matched socks carefully, lining them up by color and size with serious concentration. "Auntie?" she asked suddenly. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Why doesn't Dad sleep at Grandma's house like other dads do?" My hands stilled on a warm towel. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She shrugged. "At school, everyone's dad lives with them, but Dad lives here, with us." The word again. Dad. This time, it didn't echo. It settled. I swallowed. "Your uncle lives here because this is his home." She frowned, clearly unsatisfied. But he's my dad. The room felt too small, the air too thin. Who told you that? I asked gently. She looked confused. No one told me, I just know. Children often say things with a certainty adults envy. They don't hedge or soften, they simply state what feels true. I forced a smile and reached for another towel. Sometimes we feel things very strongly, but that doesn't always make them facts. She nodded slowly, though I could tell she didn't understand. Okay. That night, I asked Mark about it. I waited until Lily was asleep. Her door cracked open just enough for the hallway light to spill across her floor. Mark sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, his glasses perched low on his nose. I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look up. Kids do that. Mark? He sighed and finally met my eyes. She's attached, you know that. So attached that she thinks, she's confused, she lost her mother. Don't make this into something it's not. His tone was calm but firm, a closed door. I nodded, even though something inside me recoiled. After that, small things began to stand out. Lily's school paperwork listed Mark as her father, written in his handwriting. Her medical forms, too. When I asked about it, he said it was easier that way, less explaining. She doesn't need more trauma. This keeps things simple. Simple for whom? I noticed that Lily had his eyes, the same deep brown, the same slight downturn at the corners when she was tired. I noticed the way she laughed, sharp and sudden, exactly like him. I noticed that there were no pictures of Mark's sister anywhere, no stories, no memories. When I asked Lily about her mother, she grew quiet. Dad says she's in heaven, he says. He says talking about it makes people sad. I started to feel like a guest in my own home, useful, trusted, but not fully included. Still, I stayed, because love doesn't leave at the first unanswered question. It waits, it hopes, it gives the benefit of the doubt until doubt is all that's left. And somewhere deep inside, a small, frightened part of me was already preparing for the truth long before I had the courage to name it. Suspicion doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in quietly, like a draft through a door you were sure was closed. It was Lily's 10th birthday when I finally admitted, to myself, that something wasn't right. I had planned the party weeks in advance. Balloons and soft pastels, a homemade cake with too much frosting, her favorite because she liked scraping it off with her finger. I invited her classmates, their parents, even Mark's coworkers he spoke about so often. I wanted her to feel surrounded, loved. Mark insisted on handling the guests list for his side. I know who matters, he said, smiling in that reassuring way that used to settle me. The party was lively, loud, messy, children running through the backyard, shrieking with sugar-fueled joy. Parents gathered in loose clusters, paper plates an end. Mark hovered near Lily most of the afternoon, laughing easily, his arm often around her shoulders. Then a woman I didn't recognize approached us. She was well-dressed, her hair carefully styled, her smile polite but strained. She looked at Lily with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. "You must be Lily," she said softly. Lily beamed. "Yes." The woman glanced at Mark, something unspoken passing between them. "She's beautiful." "Thank you," I said, stepping forward. "I'm her aunt." The woman's smile faltered, just for a second. "Oh." Mark cleared his throat. "This is a colleague," he said, "from work." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on Lily. "She looks just like—" "Cake," Mark interrupted too quickly. "We're cutting the cake." The moment passed, but the unease stayed. Later, as guests trickled out and the sun dipped low, I watched Lily open gifts. Mark sat beside her, closer than necessary, his hand resting protectively on her back. He looked proud, not uncle proud, father proud. That night, after Lily was asleep, I asked him about the woman. "She's just someone from work," he said. "You're reading too much into it." But he avoided my eyes. That was new. After that, the patterns sharpened. Mark began insisting on attending Lily's doctor appointments, alone. He took over school drop-offs on certain days, rearranging his schedule without explanation. He grew oddly defensive when I suggested changes to Lily's routine. "She needs stability," he'd say, "consistency," as if I hadn't been providing that all along. One evening, while folding laundry, I found a small envelope tucked inside Mark's jacket pocket. No return address. Inside was a school photo of Lily, one I hadn't seen yet. On the back, in careful handwriting, were the words, "She's growing so fast." No name, no signature. Just that. I sat on the bed holding the photo, my chest tight. That photo had been taken during school hours. Mark hadn't mentioned it. And why wasn't it with the rest of the photos, pinned to the fridge or tucked into a frame? I placed it back where I found it and said nothing. Silence had become my language. The night everything truly shifted came quietly. Mark was late, later than usual, past midnight. I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking louder with every passing minute. Lily was asleep upstairs, her door closed. When Mark finally came in, his coat smelled unfamiliar. Not like the warehouse, not like coffee. Something floral, faint but unmistakable. "Long night?" I asked. He nodded. "Inventory issues." I stood and walked toward him. "You smell different." He stiffened. "Don't start." That was the first time he'd ever said that to me. "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm asking." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Because Lily thinks you're her father. Because paperwork says you are. Because strangers look at her like she belongs to you in ways you've never explained." His jaw tightened. "You're crossing a line." The words stung more than I expected. "What line?" I whispered. "I raised her. I deserve to understand." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw fear in his eyes. "Drop it," he said. "For her sake." For her sake. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, listening to the house settle, to Mark's footsteps upstairs, to the steady rhythm of a life I no longer recognized. I thought about Lily's face, her certainty, her trust. I thought about myself, how easily I had stepped into a role without asking enough questions. By morning, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The truth wasn't going to come to me gently. If I wanted it, I would have to go looking. And once I did, nothing would be the same. I didn't confront him right away. That surprised even me. Instead, I watched. I watched the way Mark's phone never left his side anymore. Not on the counter, not on the coffee table, not even when he showered. I watched the way he stepped outside to take calls, lowering his voice as if the night itself were listening. I watched the way Lily's schedule suddenly mattered to him more than mine ever had. And I watched myself shrink into the background of my own marriage. The truth came to me the way most devastating truths do, not with a confession, but with proof I wasn't supposed to see. It was a Thursday afternoon. Lily was at school. Mark had left early, claiming a meeting that couldn't wait. I was cleaning the study, a room we barely used, when I found an old storage box shoved behind a filing cabinet. It wasn't locked. That should have been my warning. Inside were documents, neatly stacked, organized, intentionally hidden. birth certificates, medical records, school enrollment forms. And then I saw it. Lily's birth certificate. My fingers trembled as I lifted it, the paper thinner than it should have been, the ink slightly faded. I scanned it once, then again. Father, Mark Henderson. My breath caught in my throat, sharp and painful, like I'd swallowed something wrong. Mother, a name I didn't recognize. Not his sister, not a relative. Someone else. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the floor, the document crumpling slightly in my grip. The room felt like it was tilting, my vision narrowing at the edges. 10 years. 10 years of bedtime stories, of scraped knees, of fevers and school plays and whispered fears in the dark. 10 years of lies. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time lost its shape. When I finally heard the front door open, my heart began to pound, not with fear, but with something colder. Resolve. Mark froze when he saw me sitting on the floor, the box open beside me. "What are you doing?" he asked. I held up the birth certificate. "This," I said, my voice eerily calm, "explains everything." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. He closed the door slowly, as if that might contain what was about to spill out. "I can explain," he said. "No," I replied. "You can answer." He sat across from me, rubbing his hands together. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "When?" I asked. "When did you decide to turn me into a stranger in my own life?" He looked down. "Before we were married." The words landed like a physical blow. She was born 2 years before we met. Her mother and we weren't serious. She didn't want to raise Lily. She disappeared. "And your sister?" I asked. He swallowed. "There is no sister." I laughed then, a short, broken sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "So you made her up?" He said, "I needed a story." "You needed a wife," I corrected. "You needed someone to raise your child while you kept your hands clean." "That's not fair," he snapped. "I loved you." "Did you?" I asked. "Or did you love what I provided?" His eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. "What about Lily?" I asked. "Does she know?" He shook his head. "I planned to tell her when she was older." "And me?" I pressed. "When was I supposed to know?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't think you'd stay." That hurt more than anything else he'd said. Because he was right. If he had told me the truth in the beginning, I might have chosen differently. But he didn't give me a choice. He took my consent and buried it under a decade of carefully constructed lies. "I want a divorce," I said. The word felt heavy, but right. Mark's head snapped up. "You can't just—" "I can, and I will." He reached for me then, his hand trembling. I pulled away. "What about Lily?" he asked desperately. "She needs you." I stood, smoothing my clothes, steady despite the storm inside me. "So did I said, "and you didn't seem to care about that." That night, I packed a bag. I went upstairs and kissed Lily's forehead as she slept, her breath warm against my skin. Tears slid silently down my face, but I didn't wake her. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Some endings need more care than anger allows. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something important. The betrayal hadn't just ended my marriage, it had rewritten my past, and the reckoning had only just begun. I didn't leave in the way people imagine leaving. There was no slammed door, no shouted accusations echoing down the hallway, just the quiet zip of a suitcase, the soft click of the front door, and the sound of my own breathing as I stood on the porch, unsure where to place my next step. I drove until the streets became unfamiliar, until the houses blurred into one another, and the sky began to lighten with the promise of morning. I ended up at my friend Clara's apartment, a woman who had known me long enough not to ask questions I couldn't yet answer. She opened the door in her robe, eyes widening when she saw my face. "Come in," she said, immediately. No judgment, no curiosity, just space. I slept on her couch for 2 days. When I woke, I felt hollowed out, as if something essential had been removed and my body hadn't figured out how to compensate yet. My phone buzzed constantly. Mark's name filled the screen over and over until Clara gently suggested I turn it off. "Whatever you decide," she said, handing me a mug of tea. "Don't decide it from panic." I nodded. Panic had already had its turn. By the third day, I was ready to move, not emotionally, but strategically. I returned to the house when Mark was at work. The quiet inside felt unnatural, like a museum of a life I used to inhabit. Lily's shoes were still by the door. Her backpack leaned against the wall, one strap twisted. I went straight to the study. I photographed everything: documents, dates, names, proof. I didn't know yet what I would need, but I knew this: I would never again rely on someone else to tell my story for me. Then I packed properly. Clothes, personal papers, the photo albums I had made, carefully labeled, years of memories bound together. I hesitated over Lily's pictures. I took copies, not originals. I wasn't going to erase myself from her life, but I wasn't going to steal her memories either. Before I left, I wrote Mark a note. 3 sentences. "I know the truth. I am filing for divorce. Do not contact me unless it is through a lawyer." I didn't explain further. Lies don't deserve closure. The next weeks unfolded slowly, deliberately. I hired a lawyer, an older woman with kind eyes and a reputation for precision. She listened without interruption as I laid everything out. When I finished, she nodded once. "You were deceived into parenthood under false pretenses," she said. "That matters." The words were validating in a way I hadn't expected. Mark tried to reach me through friends, through emails, through guilt-laced messages that spoke of regret and fear and Lily's confusion. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote Lily a letter. I rewrote it 6 times. In the end, it was simple. "I love you. I always have, and I always will. None of this is your fault. Some truths are hard, but love doesn't disappear because of them." I didn't send it yet. I wasn't ready to let it go without knowing when or how it should land. The hardest part wasn't the legal process or the logistics of starting over. It was the waiting. Waiting to hear how Lily was doing. Waiting to see if Mark would tell her the truth. Waiting to find out who I was without the roles I had worn for so long. Wife, caretaker, quiet accomplice to a lie I never agreed to. One afternoon, Clara asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Do you want Lily to know you left because of her?" "No," I said immediately. "Never." "Then," she said gently, "make sure your silence doesn't say that for you." That night, I asked my lawyer about visitation, about whether someone like me, someone without blood or legal claim, had any standing at all. She was honest. It will be difficult, but not impossible, especially if her father admits the deception. So I made a decision. I agreed to meet Mark, in public, with boundaries. We met at a cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled on him. His eyes darted to the door every few seconds, as though expecting Lily to walk in. "She asked for you," he said immediately. I held up a hand. "We are not here to talk about feelings." He winced. "I deserve that." "Yes," I said. "You do." I slid copies of the documents across the table. This ends one of two ways. You tell Lily the truth with the counselor present, and you acknowledge my role in her life, or this goes much further than either of us wants. He stared at the papers, his face draining of color. You would expose me? He asked. I would correct the record, I replied. There's a difference. His shoulders sagged. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I said quietly. You just didn't care enough not to. That was the last time I spoke to him as his wife. From that moment on, I became something entirely else. Someone who chose herself. Truth has a way of moving through communities faster than lies ever expected to. Mark told Lily with a child therapist present. He told me afterward that she didn't cry at first. She just sat very still, twisting a string on her sweater, asking the same question over and over. Why didn't anyone tell me? That question traveled. It reached the school when Lily asked her teacher why her last name was different from the one she'd been using. It reached the parents who had watched me volunteer for years, who assumed I was simply another stay-at-home aunt with too much time and too much love. It reached Mark's workplace, where the woman from the birthday party, Lily's biological mother, had finally been named aloud instead of avoided. She was married. That detail changed everything. What had once been a private deception became a moral reckoning. Mark's employer didn't fire him, but he was reassigned, quietly, the kind of move that speaks volumes without announcements. The woman transferred departments shortly after. She never contacted me. I never sought her out. Some conversations don't need to happen to be understood. The school counselor called me one afternoon. Lily keeps asking if you abandoned her, she said gently. The words knocked the air from my lungs. I didn't, I said, though my voice shook. I stepped away from a lie. We know, she said, but children don't separate the two easily. With my lawyer's help and Mark's reluctant cooperation, I was granted supervised visitation. The first time Lily saw me again, she ran. She wrapped her arms around my waist with the same force she had when she was small, burying her face in my coat as if afraid I might disappear again. I held her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, my heart aching with relief and grief all at once. You didn't leave me, she whispered. No, I said, pressing my cheek to her hair. I didn't. People talked. Some praised me for my restraint. Others questioned why I hadn't seen it sooner. A few hinted that maybe I should have stayed for the child. I learned quickly who deserved my attention and who didn't. Mark's parents called once. His mother cried. His father was silent. You were good to her, his mother said. We know that. That was all I needed. The divorce finalized quietly, no courtroom drama, no public statements, just signatures and sealed envelopes and the slow, deliberate closing of a chapter I hadn't known was built on false pages. The house was sold. I took my share and bought something smaller, lighter, filled with windows and air, a place that belonged only to me. Lily came on Sundays. We baked, we talked, we learned how to speak honestly again, about feelings, about fear, about how love can exist alongside disappointment. Mark kept his distance during those hours. He honored the agreement. It was the least he could do. I never spoke badly of him to Lily. Truth doesn't need venom to be powerful. What surprised me most wasn't the fallout. It was the clarity. Once the lie was gone, everything else became simpler. Not easier, but cleaner. I could grieve what I lost without questioning whether it had ever been real. I could love Lily without pretending. And slowly, I could see myself again, not as someone defined by sacrifice, but by choice. By the time Lily turned 12, she understood. You didn't lie, she said one afternoon, her voice steady in a way that startled me. You just didn't know. No, I said. She smiled softly. I'm glad it was you. That sentence healed something I hadn't known was still broken. Healing didn't arrive as a moment. It arrived as a pattern. It looked like Sunday mornings with the windows open, light skilling across the kitchen floor, while Lily and I stood shoulder to shoulder, quietly working dough between our palms. It sounded like her laughter, older now, steadier, when I pretended not to know how to crack an egg without making a mess. It felt like breathing without bracing. I started therapy after the divorce finalized, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand how easily I had disappeared inside a life that wasn't telling me the truth. My therapist was patient, asking questions that lingered long after our sessions ended. "When did you stop asking what you needed?" she asked once. I didn't answer right away. I thought of the early years with Mark, the way I folded myself around his schedule, his silences, his explanations. I thought of how being needed had slowly replaced being known. "I don't think I noticed when it happened," I finally said. She nodded. "That's usually how it works." I learned to sit with that, not as a failure, but as a lesson. I took a part-time job at a local library, quiet work, gentle rhythms. I liked helping children find books that made their eyes light up. I liked the way stories waited patiently to be opened, never forcing themselves on anyone. Sometimes Lily came after school and sat at a corner table doing homework while I worked. Other patrons assumed she was my daughter. I didn't correct them, not because I was hiding anything, but because the truth didn't need a footnote. Mark and I rarely spoke. When we did, it was civil, contained, purposeful. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. I didn't ask how he was healing. That was no longer my responsibility. What mattered was Lily. We talked openly now, about her mother, about Mark's mistakes, about mine, about how love can exist alongside truth, but never in place of it. One evening, as we washed dishes together, she said something that stayed with me. "You didn't leave because you stopped loving me," she said. "You left because you loved yourself." I set the plate down slowly. "Yes, that's right." She nodded, as if filing the thought away for later use. I realized then that the greatest gift I could give her wasn't sacrifice, it was an example. The house I lived in now was modest, but it was honest. Every item inside it had been chosen deliberately, nothing hidden, nothing explained away. I hung my own photos, traveled when I wanted, learned how to sit alone without feeling lonely. There were nights I missed the idea of being married, not Mark himself, but the comfort of shared history. I let those feelings come and go without judgment. Healing doesn't erase longing. It teaches you not to build a life around it. On my 48th birthday, Lily gave me a card she'd made herself. Inside, in careful handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for choosing truth. It taught me how to be brave." I cried then. Not quietly, not politely. I cried because something had come full circle, because the child I raised, under false pretenses but with real love, had grown into someone who understood what it meant to stand up without bitterness. Mark never apologized the way movies teach people to apologize. There was no grand confession, no speech that wrapped everything up neatly. But one afternoon, as Lily packed her bag to leave, he paused at the door. "You were the best thing that ever happened to her," he said. I met his eyes. "And lying to me was the worst thing you ever did." He nodded. "I know." That was enough. Not forgiveness, but closure. Now, when I think back to the night Lily first called him dad, I no longer feel the sharp edge of betrayal. I feel clarity. That word cracked something open, not to destroy me, but to free me. I lost a marriage built on deception, but I kept my dignity. I kept my voice. And I kept a love that never needed lies to survive. Some truths arrive late, but when they do, they give you the chance to choose yourself, fully, finally, and without apology. If you had told me years ago that one word from a child could unravel an entire marriage, I might not have believed you. But life doesn't always break us with shouting or storms. Sometimes it does it quietly, over dinner, with a glass of juice, in a voice that trusts you enough to tell the truth out loud. I didn't lose everything in that moment. I lost an illusion. And in its place, I gained something far more lasting. My dignity, my clarity, and the courage to choose honesty, even when it cost me comfort. Loving Lily was never a mistake. Staying silent for so long was. Because love should never require you to disappear, and family should never be built on a lie someone else expects you to carry forever. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a moment when your heart knew the truth before your mind was ready to accept it, I hope you remember this. It is never too late to step out of someone else's shadow and reclaim your voice. Thank you, dear listeners, for sitting with me through the story of betrayal, strength, and quiet healing. If stories like this matter to you, real lives, real choices, and real consequences, please support this channel by subscribing and pressing like. It helps these voices be heard. And I leave you with one question, from my heart to yours. If you discovered the life you were living was built on a lie, would you stay silent for the sake of peace or walk away to save your soul? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.